The Edmonton Oilers put together one of their most complete victories of the season, trouncing the New York Rangers 6-2 on Saturday night, and we're going to talk all about it on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can kick off the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we are going to unpack what made Saturday night such a cohesive, coherent, and decisive victory. We're going to approach it from a few different respects. Now, as you probably know, I am a Rangers fan by trade. I do a Rangers podcast that airs on Mondays. I have a Rangers forearm tattoo. I have a particular adeptness in understanding the New York Rangers and their issues. So we're going to be able to attack this game from both perspectives in a really deep and meaningful way that I can't always do after a game. You know, I'm not as in-depth with the Minnesota Wild per se as I am with the Rangers. So we're going to compare these two teams because I know based on where their best players are positionally in their lineups, you wouldn't think these teams are very similar. You know, the Rangers have been struggling to find the franchise first-line center since Mark Messier retired 20 years ago. The Oilers have two of the 5-6 best centers in the entire world on the same team. The Rangers have an all-world goaltender. The Oilers have the Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard tandem. I know it was Jonathan Quick on Saturday night. So we'll start there. Our second segment, we're going to talk about stylistically what the Oilers did to exploit the Rangers' weaknesses. And then in our final segment, we're going to talk about what this upcoming week represents for the Oilers in terms of a reset, a couple of days off in a row, get right, get healthy, a couple guys dealing with nagging, lingering injuries. So at the outset, going into a Rangers-Oilers game, they seemingly always have one of those moments. You know, I think about that McDavid goal, I think it was 3 seasons ago now in the fall of 2021, 2022, where he went through the entire Rangers team. Yes, it had to have been 3 seasons ago because Patrick Nemeth was on the Rangers, and that was the only season he was on the Rangers, 2021, 2022. So these games always seem to have moments. And in this game, you had 2. You had the silly Podkolzin goal, got his first of the season, and then you had the Darnell Nurse shorthanded goal. And you are off to the races at that point. And I do think it's important to note that the Rangers play a very similar style to what the Oilers want to do, where they're counterattacking, they're using transition, they're breaking out, and they're putting pressure on teams. And the Oilers beat the Rangers at their own game. And I've been very critical of the Oilers looking slow, looking disorganized, clunky in transition, unable to break out, mediocre special teams, and the Oilers shorthanded, mind you, missing a few regulars in Arvidsson and Hyman, and they came out and they played really well. And I think what makes this interesting from a conversational or a narrative standpoint is the fact that the Rangers and the Oilers are dealing with very similar issues. They are both amongst the better teams in the NHL on paper. There is ubiquitous star power up and down both of these lineups. You know, we talk about the Oilers and their magnificent first power play, 2 former MVPs in Draisaitl and McDavid, a point per game defenseman in Evan Bouchard, former 50-goal guy in Hyman. I know he's out, but for the purposes of the narrative and what we're trying to talk about right now, we include him. Nugent-Hopkins, 100-point forward a couple seasons ago. That doesn't include Ekholm, who's one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire NHL. You throw in Jeff Skinner, who's had 30 goals a couple times. You throw in Arvidsson, who's been 20, 25 goals a couple times. Adam Henrique, who has been 15 to 25 goals pretty consistently throughout his career. Strong specialists like Connor Brown and Matthias Janmark. And all of that in the aggregate is supposed to make up for the team's deficiencies. They're very, I will say, volatile defensively, that they're prone to the big mistake where when you look at the underlying numbers, it might not be the most egregious thing in the world, but the mistakes they make are really glaring and really painful, frankly, to sit through. And that's kind of how it feels for the Rangers as well. And I say that because the Rangers are they're constructed in a similar way in terms of being overly reliant on their best players to carry an excised portion of the load, meaning most nights for the Rangers, it is going to come down to whether or not Artemi Panarin, Adam Fox, and Igor Shesterkin can make the difference. For the Oilers, most nights, these games come down to whether Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Evan Bouchard can make a difference. Now, the Oilers have the benefit of their best players being forwards and one defenseman, whereas the Rangers, it is always going to be difficult for a goalie to have as much influence over a game as a forward. A forward does more that can materially change a game state. The example I always use is you could have two brick walls, and two brick walls in the nets would concede 0 goals. You know, if you covered the entire net with brick, you lined it with mortar, and you built a physical wall, the game would go on forever. Two perfect goalies eventually need help. You know, Shesterkin can score goals himself, Quick can score goals himself. And that's really been the Rangers' issue, is that when they have gotten into games and into playoff series against better teams, the better team stars have outplayed their stars. And that was the case on Saturday night. I don't think McDavid and Draisaitl were like world beaters, that they did anything stupendous, anything that was like uncharacteristically good. You know, Draisaitl had a couple, McDavid had a couple. You get points from both, you get Bouchard points, and they really just dismantled the Rangers. And I have been begging for the Oilers to kind of find, I shouldn't even say kind of, to find a way to get to their game. The Oilers are at their best when they are making other teams actively play defense and make decisions. They trounced the Rangers in transition. One of the worst games I have seen the Rangers play in quite a while, not just this season, dating back. You know, this is easily a game I could have seen them playing 2 years ago under Gerard Gallant, where that team was too comfortable. All their stars were pretty firmly entrenched. They all had nice contracts. They all knew they were not going anywhere. And sitting here now, it feels like the Oilers, very similarly to the Rangers, they are close. And when I say close, I mean they're in the conversation as far as Stanley Cup contender. And going into the weekend, I really wanted to see how the Oilers would take advantage of the Rangers' defensive woes. That was the last thing I said on the Friday edition of the show going into the weekend, was I want to see how the Oilers handle the Rangers' weak defense. And the Oilers put a ton of heat on the Rangers' defense, and almost immediately, you know, the Podkolzin goal comes only a few minutes in. It comes in the first period. And you go back and look, Podkolzin makes that goal happen entirely by himself. Panarin loses the puck because Brett Kulak makes a really good play on it. Podkolzin passes it to Connor Brown, who leaves it back for him. Draisaitl skates it in. And then if you go back and watch the play, the right defenseman for the Rangers, Victor Mancini, is not ready to be an NHL player. He was a 5th-round pick a couple years ago. He broke the team out of camp because because Ryan Lindgren missed the start of the season with an injury. But he is leaning, trying to poke the puck away from Draisaitl. And he just doesn't get close enough, and Draisaitl just puts it on Podkolzin's stick. And Schneider's doing a reasonable job of trying to take away the pass, but at the same time, because Mancini takes himself out of the play by not being aggressive and being too passive, it puts you behind the 8 ball. And then the shorty, that's circa the playoff run. That is exactly what Janmark was doing so well in the playoffs, skating pucks in deep, winning pucks, forcing the other team to come back on defense, come get the puck. And because the entire Rangers power play is trying to get the puck to go to offense, well, they're not paying attention to Darnell Nurse leaking in the back door, and it's 2-0 in the first period. And then you can start to dismantle the Rangers. And we're going to talk about why the Oilers were able to do such a good job dismantling them stylistically coming up next, so be sure to stick around. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. In the NFL tonight, Monday night, we've got one of the better regular season games we're going to have all year. The Baltimore Ravens taking on the LA Chargers. The Ravens, two-time NFL MVP Lamar Jackson heading out to the West Coast to take on Justin Herbert and the Chargers. The Ravens are 2.5-point favorites. The over-under for the game is 50.5. Head on over to FanDuel.com where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Edmonton Oilers Victory Monday, where we are unpacking what was maybe the Oilers' best win of the season. Okay, I can put my hand up and say that as a sports media person, I am occasionally a victim of recency bias, that it's the most recent impressive win. You know, their win against Ottawa during the week was pretty good. But coming off of the throttling that Minnesota gave them on Thursday, for the Oilers to come out and really pick apart the Rangers at their weaknesses, and this wasn't just the Oilers star players outplaying the Rangers star players. The Oilers supporting cast did a really nice job in this game. You know, Nurse shorthanded goal, the Janmark play to set up the Nurse shorthanded goal, the Podkolzin goal, and then you get your big dogs. You get goals from McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard. You're going to dissect them, and the Rangers suffer from a similar affliction to the Oilers. And you have heard me say 1,000 times, and we're 6 weeks into the 2024-2025 NHL season, the Oilers like the home run pass too much. You know, in the non-McDavid minutes, I should say, as the qualifier. When McDavid's out there, they do the slow regroup. They bring it back to him. He regroups in the neutral zone, and then he breaks out with speed. We know that's what they like to do when he's out there with Bouchard, Ekholm, and then whatever permutation of wingers or Leon and another winger they give him. But in this game, the Oilers did a great job of putting heat on the Rangers defensively and forcing them to actively play defense. And this is where a team, even if it's not that talented, you know, Montreal did this really well to Edmonton last Monday for the other end of the spectrum. You know, Montreal's not that talented of a team. You know, I like Suzuki, I like Slafkovsky, I like Caulfield. They have nice individual pieces. They are nowhere near as talented as the Rangers, nowhere near as talented as Edmonton. But if you keep dumping the puck in, you force bad defensemen to have to make plays on the puck, you can dissect them. Because the Rangers, similarly to the Oilers, love to cheat to try and create offense. What do I mean by that? So let's close our eyes, if you will, and picture a defenseman going behind his own net to recover the puck. In theory, when you are struggling to break the puck out of your own zone cleanly, that first pass needs to be 10 to 15 feet. That defenseman should be somewhere along the boards at the half wall in the circle. So not in the literal circle, but along the wall within the measurement, the length, the width, the length of the circle, for if you will. That pass, that first pass, when you are struggling to break it out, it is your job as a forward to come back in your own zone and give your defenders an outlet to pass to. Teams that struggle in transition, all too often, they are overly reliant on defensemen throwing 40, 50 feet passes. And that bomb pass is a great idea, and it works if you are good at it. The problem is the Rangers, other than Adam Fox, are not good at that long breakout pass. So the Oilers keep dumping the puck in, forcing the Rangers to go back and get it. The Rangers aren't coming back to make themselves available to receive passes, so the Oilers are able to push them further back. And this is where you start to get a real downhill momentum. You know, I always make the illusion of swimming against a riptide. You know, you go to the beach and the tide keeps pulling you out. And instead of swimming against it because you're going to tire yourself out and you're not going to be able to beat it, you're supposed to swim parallel to the beach until you're out of that riptide. The Rangers were swimming headfirst into that riptide as hard as they possibly could. And this is one of those things that's a bit oxymoronic, where to a casual observer, to somebody who doesn't really understand the strategy or the tactics, if you will, you would say the Rangers looked disjointed. Excuse me, not disjointed. That's not the word I was looking for. You would say the Rangers looked lazy. You would say they weren't working hard. In fact, when a team is struggling in transition, it means they're working too hard more often than not, because guys are having to play outside of their comfort. And the Oilers, again, they did a masterful job of making the Rangers uncomfortable. And that is a strong sign that the Oilers might, and I use might very, very liberally here, be finding a corner to turn. You have heard me for weeks now on this show say, I need to see the Oilers string together what they're supposed to be. We've done 2 or 3 episodes of the show since the start of the season based on the idea of the elevator pitch, that on paper, the Oilers have enough baseline talent. And the theory is that as the season goes along, you keep building, you keep making incremental progress. You start to get more out of guys like Podkolzin, like Ty Emberson, one of Troy Stetcher or Travis Dermott. Nurse begins to stabilize. And I will say, I think Nurse with Kulak is starting to prove a reasonably functional pair. And that gets the Oilers to 2 pairs. And in theory, if you continue to bring Emberson along, then maybe we only need to add 1 defenseman as opposed to 2. Now, the Oilers do have issues. That is not, that 1 win is not to say the Oilers are entirely out of the woods. When you look at these stats, especially the even strength numbers, the Oilers are not a particularly dynamic offensive team outside of their big boys. When you go and look, and I'm clicking over to Hockey Reference right now because I wanted to get the updated number because I wrote this down last night. The Oilers are 1 goal above league average. Now, it helps that they had the Ottawa game last week and the Ranger game where they were able to put 5 and 6 on the board. They're 1 goal over league average. They've given up 69 goals. They still have a negative goal differential on the season, but the league average is 63 goals for, 63 goals against. I know that might seem funky, but if you add up all of the goals for all of the teams, it's always going to be even for league average because it's counting every goal in every game. So every goal, offense and defense in every game counts. So that's why that number is always going to be the same. But you sort by even strength goals. Leon McDavid, 1-2, obviously, 14. Draisaitl leads the league in goals and even strength goals. McDavid has 7. Bouchard has 6. Kulak has 4. Skinner has 4. Perry has 4. Connor Brown has 3. You do even strength assists, it's even more glaring where you go McDavid, Draisaitl. Matthias Janmark is 3rd on the Oilers in even strength assists right now. That is not the Oilers functioning as intended. And we know Hyman has more to give. We assume Arvidsson, once he's healthy, has more to give. I don't know if Jeff Skinner has more to give. I definitely plan on doing an episode about Jeff Skinner this week with the days off, no games. It does lend itself to more of these investigative and exploratory type episodes, which I love to do because I love research, man. I might have to go back to grad school purely just to do more research because there are so many interesting things I want to explore. But the Oilers have work to do. Winning the way they did against the Rangers, that's a good sign because the Rangers have done a really nice job this season of beating non-playoff teams. But when they've played good teams, the Rangers have 1 win against playoff teams so far this season. I believe they're 1-6 in teams that are currently in playoff spots as we sit here on Sunday, November 24th, recording this episode for Monday, the 25th. We are going to take one more final break, and then we are going to talk about what a long week off and days off represents for an Oilers team that is trying to make progress coming up right after this. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million users and active in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks puts all of their members first, so withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. If you think Connor McDavid's going to have more than half a goal in the Oilers' next game, if you think Evan Bouchard's going to have more than 3.5 shots on goal in their next game, download the PrizePicks app. Use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. And this week, with American Thanksgiving, PrizePicks has a free selection. Tyreek Hill only needs to receive half a receiving yard for the projection to hit. If you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. So download the PrizePicks app. Use code LOCKEDONNHL so they know we sent you, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are going to try, and that's the key here. The Oilers and the Rangers are two teams that are in similar boats. And I mean, they have talent. They have okay records. The real inflection point, if you will, is how serious are they? How serious of Stanley Cup contenders are you? And the argument for both of these teams is largely environmental still. For the Oilers, it's that they play in a very weak division where the Canucks are not nearly as good as they were expected to be. I still am very skeptical of the Calgary Flames' ability to prolong this strong start. The Kings, the Oilers are better than the Kings. I don't really need to pay too much thought to that. The Kraken, the Oilers are better than the Kraken. The two Southern California teams in Anaheim and San Jose, not really doing a whole lot to worry me. Sure, the Oilers have work to do, but their division is very weak, and the bottom half of the Central is pretty mediocre as well. So even if the Oilers perchance don't break into one of the three Pacific Division playoff spots, they very easily can end up in a wild card spot almost by default. You know, each of the last couple seasons post-COVID, a team makes the playoffs by accident where they really have no business being there, but 8 teams need to make it. You know, last year, the Islanders were the team, the Capitals, both really weak teams that kind of struggled and took advantage of weak divisions. You go 2 years ago, Nashville didn't really deserve to make the playoffs, but they did by default. Sitting here now, it's the same thing for the Rangers. The Rangers aren't playing very good hockey, but they have enough star power that they're going to beat the bad teams. And there are enough bad teams that if you beat them and you at least take 1 out of 3 from your good divisional opponents, you know, if you go 1-3 against Carolina, 1-3 against the Devils, you scrounge 7-8 points out of your divisional opponents, your good ones, you'll have more than enough. The Rangers are too good of a team, and the East at large stinks. I mean, after you get past Florida, you're talking about the Candy Canes, who I'm just going to be honest with you. I think Rod Brindamore's a good coach. That team's not good enough to win a Stanley Cup. The Leafs, give me a break. The Lightning, come on. After you get past Florida, someone has to be the second best team in the East. A lot of people listening to this are probably saying, well, Nick, it's the Devils. And yes, but the Devils are very similar to not the Capitals, excuse me. They're very similar to Carolina in the respect that they are going to be good regular season wise, but I am very curious to see how they handle the differences between regular season and playoff hockey. That has continually been a problem for the Hurricanes in these games, in these playoff series, where they're going to play against teams that have more high-end talent. And I mean, the Rangers are not possession darlings. They never have been. And the Rangers beat them twice in 3 years in relatively comfortable fashion. And look, I know in 2022, the Rangers were down 3-2 and they had to win 2 in a row to get to a game 7. But like, Carolina's just not scary. Their style is annoying, but it doesn't have the same juice. And Florida is the high-end version of that. Florida plays very similarly stylistically to Carolina. It's just that they have Barkov and Reinhart, Chuck, and they have Bob in net. But for the Oilers, this is a week off to get healthy. You've got Darnell Nurse, who you know is dealing with multiple lingering injuries between the concussion, probably, I'm going to assume he suffered last Saturday against the Leafs on the Ryan Reeves hit, and the nagging injury he came into the season with. 4 days off for treatment is going to be a delight. You know McDavid is not 100%, but he's so good, it doesn't matter. That lower body, that presumed ankle injury against Columbus, 4 days off for treatment, maybe a little work, maybe a little ice work. I assume the Oilers will have practice at least twice in the days off, but having a true away unplugged day is really good, especially for your stars who are so stubborn about missing opportunities, even if it's in their own interest. You know, you got to get Hyman healthy. You got to get Arvidsson healthy. For Chris Knobloch, this is an opportunity to take stock, to catch his breath, to look around and say, we endured a slow start. We have work to do. Our division is not very good. Let's do what we can to get Zach Hyman going. We have a pleasant surprise here in Vasily Podkolzin. And look, I know there are people who aren't watching the Oilers on a nightly basis who are confused as to why the Oilers are so Oiler fans are so excited about Podkolzin finding the chemistry he has with Draisaitl, especially considering he has one goal on the season. But it's very clear that Podkolzin fits what the Oilers want from that Draisaitl line. And, you know, he got run with McDavid and Draisaitl earlier last week as well. And Podkolzin is a good forechecker. He plays really well in a straight line. He forces defenders to play defense. That's the type of player. Doesn't make a lot of money, doesn't put up a lot of points, but is a lot more functional than the typical intangibles and grit types that general managers and organizations seem to covet, because that's how it always has been, as opposed to what it is now. And the parting thought I want to leave you with here, the Oilers are not a finished product. The Oilers are going to add at least one, if not two players at the trade deadline. They may or may not have to reincorporate Evander Kane at some point in the upcoming months. They have opportunities from people like Podkolzin, or maybe Noah Phillip, or Ty Emberson, or even Stuart Skinner to play a little bit better, to give them more room. Right now, my big concern and my big question mark is how much margin of error can the Oilers create? McDavid and Draisaitl and Bouchard, they cover a lot of mistakes. They fill in a lot of gaps, and they are such talented players that they are able to control games, even when the rest of the team isn't particularly deep or playing particularly well. Can you find more things to work for you? Can you afford to split up McDavid, Draisaitl, and then keep your preferred third line of Connor Brown, Janmark, and Adam Henrique? Then, can we push our fourth line a little bit more? Can we get more from Derek Ryan and Corey Perry? Is there anything else we can squeeze out of that? If Kulak and Nurse works, okay, all we need to do is get our third pair right. And all of that seems relatively, I don't want to say academic, but problem solving often is. You lay out your issue, you try and brainstorm solutions, and you start to work your path. I have always been of the opinion it's easier to work backwards, where you know what the end goal is, and then you try and work on the steps to get there, as opposed to step, because then you can get sidetracked, you get lost in the weeds. But that'll do it for this Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I want to thank everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Now, go check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, where you can dominate your league mates with tips from Steal and Flip. Subscribe to Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts. 5 stars on Apple or Spotify. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. YouTube, you'll get more stuff out of the experience this week, because there will definitely be visual stuff. I'll probably break out the dry erase board again more than once. We'll do some goal talk, some play creation stuff, maybe diagnose the Oilers power play a little bit. All of that coming up this week with the Oilers. No games, quite a few days. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.